welcome to our Golden 20's podcast. My name is Tegan, and I'm joined with my co-host Sadie.
Hello.
And we're here to talk all about therapy, because if you've listened to any of our episodes in the past, we both love therapy. This was like a journey we both kind of went on in our 20s, and I feel like literally every single person should be in therapy, and that it's a really, I think, like important step in learning about yourself and healing yourself and all that good stuff. So we're going to be talking about all of the things we've learned in therapy so far. But before we dive into that, I think we're going to do a connection card.
Let's do it. So today's card says, what do you do or where do you go when you need to be alone? Interesting. I think my answer is easy because I spend a lot of time alone. That said, I also need a lot of time alone. So I live on my own. My last roommate moved out like 5 years ago, like quite a while ago. So when I need to be alone, I just come to my apartment, and typically my phone's on Do Not Disturb. And it depends why I need to be alone. Like if I'm just low energy and need to recharge, I'll probably lay on the couch and turn on Friends, something that requires zero brain power. But if it's like I need to be alone because I'm frustrated or angry, or I have days where I'm just like, nobody understands me, like I'm just, I'm either not communicating clearly or something's going on in the stars where I'm just butting heads with everybody. Those kinds of days, I come home and typically whip out my journal, which I know is the other thing I go on and on about in addition to therapy in every podcast episode that I can. It's just how great it is to journal and get all my thoughts and feelings out on paper to free the mental space, but also just to kind of like, I don't know, hear myself out, or like, I feel like sometimes in the process of writing things out or thinking about things and just like voicing, like I said, every thought in my head, I start to like make peace with it, get my closure, and then that's what lets me move on from that frustrating situation. So yeah, in any case, I'm home by myself since I have the privilege of living alone.
Yeah, I love that. Definitely makes sense. I feel like for me, I'm also at home, but it's harder for me to be alone. Like I work from home, my husband works from home, so we are both at home probably like 90% of the time. And I will say this was kind of a big motivation for us moving, is it's very hard when you live with another person to get your like needed alone time. So it's definitely improved with moving, because it's like there's nothing worse than if you have a fight with someone and then you're both like, we lived in a studio apartment. You're just like sat there looking at each other, and it's like everyone knows sometimes you just need a little space. So I think for me, it's oftentimes like I'm just chilling in my room, like my bedroom, and then I can kind of just lay on my bed, chill out. I'm very anti like eating in bed or doing like other activities in bed outside of like sleeping, sex, that kind of thing. But I've been on this whole like sleep journey, and this is a big thing the doctors talk about. And so it's definitely supposed to be like a safe space. So spend a lot of time there if I need to be alone. And sometimes I'm on my phone, sometimes I'm reading. I actually just got noise canceling headphones this year. And this was, again, part of like wanting to live with someone. And I like having someone there all the time. But it's also just like sometimes I want to shut off the world. So I'll often have my headphones on. And whether I'm doing like an audiobook or listening to just like classical music, whatever, that's really the vibe. I'm still like not used to having more space. So every once in a while I'll be like, oh yeah, like I could go sit in my living room and be even further. So it's like if I'm feeling sick and want to be alone, I'm often just like chilling on the couch by myself. But I will say most of the time just like hanging out in my bedroom, headphones on, reading a book or looking at my phone.
Door closed, sign on it says no boys allowed. And then you're like, okay, now you can come back in, I'll take the sign down.
Exactly. I will say, like, our bedroom has, like, we don't let our cats in our bedroom, and they have just figured out how to open doorknobs.
Oh, shoot.
So now it has a lock, thankfully. So now I'm like, door is locked. You are not permitted. So it's like even extra. But I do also love a bath, I will say, because again, it's just like a very like private thing. Obviously, like my husband's not just like chilling in the bathroom while I'm taking a bath. So that's another thing. If I'm just like, you know what, I need a moment, or even if I'm just like crashing out about something. Like I was crashing out not that long ago because I had like bad period cramps, and then I got a nosebleed, which sorry, this is like so much TMI I'm just spilling from this question, but for some reason now I get really bad nosebleeds when I'm on my period.
Oh God.
And so I was literally crashing out about this, and I was like, I just need a bath and I need to just sit and stare at a white wall in hot water, and I was cured. So that I think is also another good option.
Yeah, that's a really great option. While you were talking, I was thinking a lot about my mom, because I think that is it. When you live with somebody, yes, if you're a mom, I feel like it's even harder to like get that alone time from your husband or your partner, and then your kids, and then throw in the pets. It's just like, oh my God, when do I have that alone time? Yeah, so I love the bath too. But my mom used to, like, when she really hit wit's end, she would go for a drive, and she would just like sit in a parking lot and eat a chocolate bar all by herself. Sometimes listening to like angry Alanis Morissette music because hello, it was the 90s. But it's funny because one of my sisters, I don't remember what the exact situation was, but she did that when she was visiting family for like the holidays at some point, where she was like, you know what? I just had to go for a drive, eat a chocolate bar in a parking lot somewhere, and just like have that alone time. So all this being said, I feel like it's also common when you do live with someone for your car to be your alone time space. If it's like commuting to and from the office, or if it's just going for a drive, like, I don't know, but it definitely is trickier. That is for sure.
Yeah, going for a walk's a big one. Like, that's not really a thing for me, but for my husband, he's just like, I'm going for a walk because I need to just get out of the house or whatever it is. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, there you go.
Yeah, went on a whole little rant, but some insights into us. So I guess diving into therapy talk, I thought maybe before we got into some of the things we learned, we could maybe talk about like why we started therapy or our therapy journey, because I feel like, at least for me growing up, it wasn't really like a normal thing, where when I was younger, I don't think I really knew anyone who was in therapy, and except for like in movies where it would maybe be played as like a punchline. But I think for me, as there was like a lot more talk around like wellness and mental health, it started to become more normalized. And through, I guess, like maybe this is a negative, but there was just like this rise of like advertising around therapy, like whether it was BetterHelp or like a lot of these online things. And that was the first time where I was like, oh, maybe this is easier than I thought. Maybe this is more normal, where before the rise of like these virtual therapies, I didn't even know like how you would get a therapist. I thought like maybe your doctor had to help you or something. And so that was what really got me started thinking about it. And then through the pandemic, I think it became even more normalized. And, you know, through the rise of TikTok, where people were more like less influencery and more just like, here's what's happening in my real life, I got to see like how normal it was. And so I started going to therapy, I think in 2021. I started with my first therapist, did that for a while, and it was something that really like my husband encouraged me, because I would be like crashing out all the time, and he'd be like, I feel like you shouldn't be freaking out like this all the time. And so started there, and then eventually was like not jiving with my first therapist, so I took a break. And then again, with just like as more stressful situations started, I started having like meltdowns again, and was like, you know what, I think I need to find another therapist. And I will say I found both of mine through Psychology Today, which is like a website where you can search and find therapists. So I've been working with my current therapist for like 3 years at this point, and I'm no longer doing weekly or anything. It's now, it kind of ebbs and flows. Sometimes it's monthly. Sometimes I won't see her for a couple of months if I'm really busy. Sometimes it's every 2 weeks. So I really kind of play it by ear, but I really love it. It's really changed my perspective on a lot of things, and that's kind of what we'll get into later. But Sadie, what was your little therapy journey like?
Yeah, I'd say actually my journey was very similar to yours, where I feel like I watched a lot of YouTube through the pandemic, and it seemed BetterHelp was sponsoring every single influencer I watched on
Yeah.
YouTube. They were all over my social media. And I do think, Tag, it is so true, where there's just like this shift in society as a whole towards like wellness and mental health. So the timing of
Yeah.
this just kind of like lined up also with the pandemic, people being at their lowest. I know I certainly was at my lowest with my mental health through the pandemic, being so isolated since I spent so much time alone and living alone through that. Like it really did play with my mental health, where it was kind of, I was going through that. I was seeing an influx of, you know, better help, H-E-L-P, or whatever their little like catchphrase was. But it was just like, okay, maybe this is something I should look into. And like maybe to your point, Tag, this isn't a hard thing or a difficult thing to start. And, you know, that would be nice, because I think too, we often, well, there's a few things I want to say, because I think at the top of this episode, Tag, you also said, I think therapy is something every single person can benefit from. And I
Yeah.
1000% agree with that. And this is a conversation I've had with so many friends since I preach everybody go to therapy, is I am very, very, very fortunate where I didn't start therapy because I have like some traumatic, you know, childhood trauma to heal from. Like I had a very, very loving family, very supportive family. My parents aren't even divorced. Like, you know, we're like that picture perfect family. And I feel like people are often like, well, there had to have been something go wrong that I need to chat through in therapy. And like, that's what starts my therapy journey. But I was just somebody who had a lot of anxiety. I really stressed about work. And I was like, why do I feel this way? And like, why is work so important to me? And I actually have two things that I'm going to chat about more in depth around things I learned in therapy to, I don't know, just kind of help talking to a therapist helped me answer some of those questions, because I knew I couldn't get there on my own. So I don't know. I feel like I just wanted to say that as well, where you don't need to have some big life traumatic or life trauma to heal from in order to start therapy. It could literally just be like, I have a lot of bad days and I want to talk to somebody about it, and I don't want to burden my partner. Or maybe you don't have anybody else to talk to. Like that's where you can, I don't know, start looking into therapy. And that's what I started to do. So I also found, despite me talking about BetterHelp so much, I also found my therapist through Psychology Today. And I think I started talking to her at the start of January, or in January of 2022. And I had just made a move in my career, left a company, and took a leap by rejoining a company I'd previously worked for. I had made that move in the fall of 2021, and I felt like I had made the biggest mistake of my life, and I was having a really hard time, like, kind of navigating through that life change. And again, 2021 was definitely the worst year for my mental health ever, where at the end of that, kind of going through this job change, really beating myself up about it, it was just like everything was crumbling down, and I was just not okay, where I was really motivated to find a therapist. And I've actually talked to the same therapist ever since. So we're going on, I guess we've celebrated 3 years together now. But I won't lie, there's been times where I'm like, I don't know if I'm getting much out of therapy anymore. And I've had conversations with my therapist being like, I need you to push me. I need you to challenge me. I need you to hold me accountable to the things that I tell you I want to talk about, because chances are I'm going to get distracted and just talk to you about work, because that's what I do. So I don't know. There's been a few times where I'm like, maybe I should look for a different therapist. But I feel like even if I don't have these grand aha moments in talking to my therapist, it's always the days after where I'm like processing our conversation that those aha moments happen, and they continue to happen. So I'm like, okay, maybe, you know, I still do have some things to learn from this therapist, but I won't be surprised if in the near future I start looking for a different therapist. And if that does come, I feel like I'll use Psychology Today again, which, by the way, is available in the States and in Canada. So wherever you're listening to this, maybe other parts of the world too, but I know for sure it's States and Canada. You just kind of punch in your zip code, postal code, whatever, and you can find a therapist near you. They have a little bio about themselves, what they specialize in. They tell you if they do in-person or virtual sessions, and you can kind of go from there and reach out to set up a consultation. And then from there, you can see, do I actually want to explore this or not? So anyways, that was a long story, but that's kind of my therapy journey so far. I will say when I started with my therapist, I had very low work benefits to cover therapy. So I talked to my therapist like once a month, maybe once every 2 months. However, when I switched jobs last year, my therapy benefits like quadrupled, and I'm very fortunate now to have a lot in coverage where I talk to my therapist every 2 weeks. Sometimes we have lots to talk about. Other times I just tell her what's happened in the past 2 weeks. But I do like your point tag around. Really depends also what you're going through in life. Like there were times even when I didn't have the budget for it, I was like, you know what? I actually do need to talk to her more than once a month. But then there was also times where I was like, no, things are going really good. Maybe we can go once a month or once every 6 weeks, something like that. So it's also okay to like kind of feel it out as you go and change up how often you talk to them based on what you're going through.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a good point to bring up around benefits and things. I know like a lot of therapists will be flexible with their pricing. If you have no benefits or if you just lost your job or things like that, if you think that therapy is out of your budget, it might still be worth talking to some therapists and seeing what the deal is. Like I know some therapists will charge more when you're being covered by your benefits, and then when they know you're being paid out of pocket, they will like eat some of the cost or whatever, things like that. So definitely something to consider as well. But I also love that you brought up the points around like, well, I feel like there's nothing wrong with me, so why should I need therapy? I was very much the same, where I was like, there's like nothing's that dire. Like maybe I'm just being dramatic. Maybe I'm like faking it, or it's not as bad as it seems. And so I wanted to say, like, if anyone listening is feeling that way, definitely try your first session or whatever. I did like a free session for my first one, and she was just asking like, how do you deal with your stress and stuff? And I was like, I don't know, I just deal with it. And she was like, wow, that must be really hard. And her saying that, I instantly started crying. And I was just like, oh, it was like, that's just probably the first thing I learned from therapy, my little light bulb moment of like, okay, it was hard. And I do deserve to have someone who listens to me and helps me with my mental health. I deserve good mental health. And so that was the first moment where I was like, you know what? I do deserve this. And I was doing myself a disservice by trying to come up with reasons why I shouldn't be in therapy. So,
yeah. And I think a common thing I hear from my friends too is like, my problems aren't big enough, like there's so many bad things happening in the world. My little reality isn't that crazy to have to talk about in therapy, but how my therapist put it is like, we all have separate pies, and maybe me stressing about how I'm going to balance work and my social life and whatever else, like that might be a small slice of someone else's pie, but that's a very big chunk of my pie, So I think it's also like, it's all relative, where sure, maybe your problems aren't, that big of a deal compared to the wars happening in the world and, like all the crazy shit we're seeing and dealing with, but it's a big deal to you. And therefore, Tag, to your point, you deserve to talk about it. You deserve to work through it and not have it weigh so heavy on you.
100%. Great. Well, should we dive into some of the things we've learned?
Let's do it. I can maybe kick us off. And I've already kind of hinted at this, but essentially why I started therapy was navigating that big career change that I made, leaving one company, going to another company. And I had also taken on a manager title, which I felt like was that next step in my career. However, very quickly I learned I wasn't going to be managing people the way I was told I would in the interview process. And essentially I was just kind of falling into what I had done at this company years and years before, and I really wasn't making that much progress despite having this manager title. So I was starting to like spiral hardcore, being like, oh my God, I've made such a mistake. And this is the first thing I talked about with my therapist. And in talking about this, she really pointed out to me in a very nice way, and like more so like help me get there on my own, is that I'm very much an all or nothing type person. Everything is very like black and white in my head. So it was very much, is this the right decision or is this the wrong decision? And I vividly remember her saying to me, why does there need to be a right or wrong? Like, why can't this just be something that's happening? And at the time, it did not resonate with me at all. I was just like, that is such a cop out.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's just like,
Yeah.
this doesn't resonate. But now
Yeah.
I'm like, it's so true. Like, I could think back on every major like milestone in my life, and it could have gone a different way, but it went the way that it went. It was the experience that was happening, and then I moved forward. You know, I decided what to do from there. It didn't set me back in a way to like prevent my storyline from progressing, essentially. So I'm like, you know what? Yeah, doesn't matter if it was the right or wrong thing. It's a choice I made, and all I can focus on is what to do next, rather than get hung up on, is this the right or wrong choice? Since we've kind of come to that conclusion and she's pointed that out in this like career context, I've also noticed how this all or nothing mentality applies to so many other things we've talked about in therapy. And it's a reoccurring theme that I probably wouldn't have realized if I was just doing my own self-awareness journey. Like, I feel like that's something you need somebody else to point out to you. But in any case, another context I learned this about myself was I talk a lot about relationships and my being single my whole life, my whole 20s, and feeling ready to open myself up to a relationship, but something's standing in my way. And one of the first things that we started to like debunk was my hyper independence. And I kept saying to my therapist, like, I don't want to give up my independence for a relationship. Like, as soon as I enter a relationship, I'm going to be codependent, and I value my independence so much. And it was very much that all or nothing mentality again, where it's like, I'm either codependent or I'm independent. And I had this mentality standing in my way of even entering a relationship because I didn't think I could have a middle ground. Like, it was either this or that, where she really introduced me to the idea of interdependence. You know, there can be two independent people in one relationship, and like, that's a healthy, normal relationship. So she's really kind of helped me break down my all or nothing mindset around that. And then this has also come up in a much like simpler way, but also impactful, around financial stress and like my financial insecurity, where I've also talked to her a lot about my shopping problem, because as much as I joke about it, I do have a tendency, like very obsessive a tendency, to buy the most expensive things and like cling on to like my skincare and beauty products from Sephora. However, I don't actually have the means to live that way all the time. So we've talked a lot about that, but it was very much like with the Sephora example, like I needed to buy absolutely every single product from Sephora or absolutely nothing at all, where she's like, girl, like, no, that's not what 90% of girls do, you know? Like, we'll maybe buy the expensive setting spray or the expensive powder, but the foundation and concealer can be from Shoppers or the drugstore. So I don't know, this is just another example, but this idea of being an all or nothing person was really something like my first aha moment. And it's something that I like, see resurface. But now that I'm aware of it, I can be like, okay, is this just me viewing this as an all or nothing? Or is this actually the reality? You know, like, does something need to give in order for this to happen? I don't know. I'm just more conscious of it now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like the awareness, like, this is probably something that's going to come up a lot, but like the awareness is the first step to like getting past that mindset, like whatever it is that you're dealing with.
Totally. 100%.
Yeah. I think like similarly, the first thing that I sort of talked about, and that sort of was an aha moment for me, was that like bad things happen and it's not necessarily your fault. Where I, like, going into my 20s, would be like if a bad thing happened, I would be like, oh yeah, that is my fault. It's because I'm a bad person, or it's because I made a mistake, so I deserve these bad things. Or like I'm not good enough, so that's why bad things happen. Where through like the whole therapy journey have been learning that like no, sometimes bad things just happen. And on the other hand, it's like no matter what, you didn't deserve that, and sort of realizing the impact of the bad things that happened. And it's like so many little things, like things people have said to me where, you know, people have made a throwaway comment or whatever it is. And it's really like profoundly impacted me. And then I was like, well, yeah, like they're right. That's why it impacted you. Like you needed to hear that. But then in talking to like a third party person, like a therapist, who will be like, why would a person say that to another person? You're like,
right.
Oh, wait, that's not normal. And so it kind of gives the scope to everything. And then they'll be like, well, they shouldn't have said that to you. Like, you don't deserve to have someone who says these things to you. So it was kind of just, like you were saying, shifting my thinking and awareness around, like, bad things happen. There are bad people in the world who will treat you badly, and it's not your fault.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this is still something similar to you that I'm working on, because it's ingrained in me where if something bad happens, my first reaction is, well, yeah, because it's you. Where now I'm like, okay, wait, take a breath. Let's figure this out. But that was definitely the first thing for me, is realizing that even if you do everything right, even if you are the best person in the world, bad things will still happen.
And that's a tough reality.
Yeah.
Like, and it's a
Kind of
tough,
bummer.
yeah. And it's a tough, like you said, mindset to break when you've been operating this way for so long. You know what I mean? So it's like,
Yeah.
again, it's good if you have the awareness of it now, kind of like you were saying, to like interrupt that thought pattern, but that doesn't mean that thought doesn't happen anymore. You know, like it is a constant reminder to yourself where it's like, okay, no, bad things happen. It's okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's not me. It's just what's happening. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and I think like bringing up the breaking of the thought pattern, that's been a big thing for me, because my thinking around it was getting worse. Where every time something bad happened, I was like, well, there you go. There's the proof you needed that you're a terrible person, because here's more bad stuff. Whereas now being able to break that and realize that, no, like bad stuff happens, or what about all the good stuff that happened that your brain's not even registering? Like we could have a whole separate episode, I think, about like those belief systems. And, you know, if you're looking for good things, you'll see good things. If you're looking for bad things, you'll see the bad things. I was looking for the bad things, and this was really a wake-up call to be like, okay, maybe you're not actually looking at the world in reality. You're looking through the lens of, you know, your past. So
Totally. And I feel like, not to spiral too much out of context here or like off the topic, but this is why talking to a therapist is so important, is having that unbiased third party perspective. Obviously a trained professional helps, but just somebody who thinks differently than you, because chances are, you know, my family and my friends are also all or nothing people. Or in Tegan's example, maybe her family and friends also see the bad things and like internalize them the same way you do. So it's really hard to move past that and break the thought patterns when you're not aware of them yourself, and then the other people who you typically confide in think the same way, you know? So I feel like that's actually a really good takeaway from both of the first things we learned in therapy, where it's like, sure, you know, we can do our own self-awareness journeys, and, you know, there's still benefits to journaling and processing your own emotions. And in my case, like, I feel like I talk myself down a lot when I do get frustrated or overwhelmed. Like, I feel like I can manage my emotions, but that's not to say like I can do it all on my own. Like, it's still nice to have a therapist to like point out things that you don't see because your thought patterns are so biased to, and you don't even realize it, essentially.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so getting back on topic, sorry, side rant concluded. The second thing I wanted to share with you guys is, again, going back to my career. So when I'm in the middle of this crisis, being like, oh my God, did I make a huge mistake? Was this the worst mistake of my entire career? Am I like totally derailed my career now? Blah, blah, blah. I was also thinking, why is my career so important to me? Because my entire 20s, I have prioritized my career above everything else. And I was happy to do that. Like, it felt natural to do it. It wasn't like I decide that I'm going to be really ambitious career woman. Like, never did I make that conscious decision. It was just like naturally, I graduated from school, started working, and that became my entire personality. And in talking to my therapist, I was like, why do I even care so much? Like, why is this decision of switching jobs literally all I can think about and making me cry and, you know, like consuming so much of my brain power, even outside of the 9 to 5 hours? And like, why do I care so much? And even throughout the work days, like I still do, but more so before I started talking to a therapist, I'd get so frustrated at work being like, again, why do I care so much? Because things would go wrong, or you know, the higher ups or your managers would make a decision that you didn't agree with, but you still had to execute it. Like, there were so many situations where I just get so frustrated and so mad. And again, I was like, why do I care? Because at the end of the day, this has nothing to do with me personally. Like, these are not my personal problems. These are the company problems, yet I'm taking them on as my personal problems. So like, why do I do that? So what was super interesting was, I don't even know how we got here, but my therapist somehow guided me to realize that it's not necessarily my career that I value, it's my lifestyle. And that's a very, very big difference. I think coming from a family that did have a lot of financial insecurity, I felt like I really had to prove myself and I really had to work hard to support the lifestyle I envisioned for myself by myself. And what that lifestyle looks like, I've talked to you guys about this. We already talked about my shopping addiction, but like, I love shopping. I love traveling. I love wearing expensive clothes. I love eating at restaurants and eating at bars. The more expensive the cocktail is, the better it is. Like, that is just how my brain operates. I also had goals to live on my own. I would love to start my own business one day. And all of these things are extremely reliant on having the money to do that. So it was more so this lifestyle that was fueling my ambition and fueling, you know, why I was chasing the next promotion or the next raise. It was because I was like, I know I need to do this in order to actually make this lifestyle I have like dreamed for myself my reality. So that was also like a really big breakthrough where it's like, yeah, my career is important to me, but it's more so the lifestyle, which means at the end of the day, if my lifestyle is what's important, like, I'm making the same amount of money since I'm salaried, regardless if I'm giving 150% or 80%, you know? So it's okay if some days I choose not to care. Some days I do the thing that I don't agree with, but everybody else wants to do. Like, I don't need to carry this weight of like, this is the most important thing, because it's not. Like, what I'm getting out of this job is the money to fuel my lifestyle, and my lifestyle is the most important thing. So that was part of it. I also think my therapist pointed out to me, again, with the idea of like financial insecurity and really trying to like break that down a bit and I guess heal from that in a way. My therapist also pointed out to me, there is no plan B for me. So if I fail or if I lose my job, like at the time when I started therapy, I had zero savings, which means if I lost my job through the pandemic, I would not be able to afford rent anymore. I couldn't live on my own, and I would have to move back in with my parents who live outside of the city. And this whole lifestyle that I value would just be over overnight kind of thing. Since then, I've obviously started to build my savings and it's not quite that drastic anymore. But all this being said, I think that was also really an underlying theme of to why I cared about my job so much was I had no choice but to make it. Therefore, I made it. You know what I mean? Like, I proved to myself I could do it on my own. I was capable. And that was just the reality I had. So I think that's also something that's different and I wouldn't have come to on my own without, or sorry, it's not different. It's so ingrained in me where I'm like, but doesn't everybody operate this way, where my therapist pointed out, like, no, that's different. Like, a lot of people's parents would help them out if they lost their job. They would just pay their rent for a few months while you found another job, where that's not an option for you. So that's why you value things differently than people who have that option. So I don't know. There was a few things to it, but it really helped answer, why do I care so much about my career? And like, why do I prioritize that about everything? And just to kind of wrap this up, this is kind of a whole other thought, but I feel like, again, going back to what we were saying, this is still something I'm like struggling with, or like need to constantly remind myself, since it's so ingrained to me to prioritize my career over everything else. But I think it's having the awareness now, and to also acknowledge, like, okay, I had to hustle when I was in my early 20s because I didn't have any savings, because I didn't make that much money, all these reasons why at that point of my life, hustling and prioritizing my career was serving me. But now it's like breaking the thought patterns of like, okay, but now I do have savings. I make significantly more money. Do I still need to value and like prioritize my career as much as I did back then? Like, no, I can actually probably take my foot off the gas now. And I don't know, just kind of like reframing my mindset, which again, very hard thing to do, but that's why I talked to my therapist, because she definitely is helping me through that.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like that's, again, a very big part of the therapy journey, is figuring out like what your values are and why they're your values. Because it's, very similar, where it's like, for me, figuring out like, this is important to me, but like, I don't even know why. It's like a subconscious thing. Why am I prioritizing this over other things? Even if I'm like, I don't want to be, but I can't help it. So yeah, I think that's very normal.
Yeah.
I think for me, the next sort of major breakthrough I had was actually getting a PTSD diagnosis from my therapist. And this was kind of aligned with my whole thinking of, like, I don't need to go to therapy because nothing's that bad. Like, nothing that bad happened to me. And then I would have these very extreme reactions to things. And then I'd be like, well, girl, what is wrong with you? Like, why are you freaking out about these things? And then when I started seeing my therapist, she was like, it sounds to me like you have PTSD. And the symptoms you're exhibiting are related to that. You're not just freaking out for any reason. And yeah, I wanted to mention this because I feel like a lot of times you can be just like, what is wrong with me? Like, I feel like I don't feel like other people. And a lot of times the first step towards trying to heal those parts of you is getting a diagnosis, which is obviously a major thing that a therapist can help you do. And so for me, like, mine was all related to work, where, again, kind of like my first point, I was treated very, very badly. But one, I like didn't know how to stand up for myself. Two, didn't really register how bad it was. And then three, when I did stand up for myself, I was fired. And so then in my brain, it was like, it was my fault, not the other person's fault. And so in getting that diagnosis, one, it was like kind of giving the forgiveness of like, it wasn't your fault. You were treated badly. And this was that third party person saying like, people shouldn't treat other people like that. And now you're having a sort of reaction to that. And then there was this whole like healing experience I had to go through with it, where I was like, well, that's not fair. Like, why me? All this stuff that comes with it. But I think like getting the diagnosis was the first step, because it made it so much easier for me to forgive myself for my reactions. Because from that experience, any sort of work, anything, if I got a message saying, hey, can we talk? I would be near tears and shaking and feeling nauseous. Where obviously, like, that's not a great reaction, because you get those messages a lot. But then I would be like, well, what is wrong with you? Like, everyone gets these messages. Why are you freaking out? And you have the data in your mind that shows you, like, you talk to people all the time and it's fine and you're not getting fired. But it was a part of that sort of reaction. And so then it also helped me understand my thought process in those moments and come up with healing. Whereas if I just did nothing, I think it would have gotten worse. So we've now been able to work through it, where now I can proudly say, if someone sends me a message saying, hey, can we talk? I can hop on the call and life is good. I will still, have maybe extreme reactions to certain things around like receiving negative feedback and things like that, but I'm able to hear it. I don't think anyone can see necessarily my reactions, and I'm like, okay, I know how to deal with it. I get off the call, have my little moment, and then we can get back to it. But it all kind of leads back to just like getting that understanding of who you are, what you're dealing with, so that you can deal with those reactions. Because I understand, like, if you're a person who's dealing with depression and you don't know that's what you're dealing with, it's incredibly frustrating to be like, why can I not just get out of bed like everyone else does? And it's very isolating. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that was a major thing for me, and I think probably a theme for people going through therapy.
Yeah, I love that so much, Tag. And I think, like, we say so many words in normal conversation that we don't understand their weight. So I think like PTSD is a great one, where it's just like, oh my God, I have PTSD from this. Like, that just comes up in conversation. Or like, I'm so anxious, I'm so stressed, I'm so depressed. Like, these are things that people will just say, but we don't actually like realize how those like situations feel. You know what I mean? So when you're actually feeling stressed, or you're actually feeling depressed, like you were saying, like, I think it's a hard time to be like, okay, this must be what I'm going through, and it actually is this bad, like it can derail my life. Or going through like really anxious spells, being like, but doesn't everyone feel this way? And like, I don't know, I feel like it's just nice to have that, again, trained professional to like talk to about your mental health. And like, if it's PTSD, if it's depression, if it's anxiety, stress, whatever it is, they can actually tell you, like, yeah, this is what it means to be anxious. Like, I think the feeling you're feeling is anxious. And like, I don't know. I feel like they just remind us that there's weight behind saying those words. It's not just like something we just casually mention in conversation. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah, but
totally. And that it's something that it's like, no, this is serious. And it's hard that you've been battling that by yourself. Yeah. I will say, I've told people in the past I have PTSD, and they've laughed because they think I'm joking. And I'm like, oh no, I wish I was joking.
Yeah. And it's also like, it's like, how do people know? You know what I mean? Like, again, this is why having a therapist is so great, because I think they validate your experience, they validate your emotions. And a lot of the time you just need to hear that. Like, it's not you, like, this is a shitty situation. You're right. Like, you went through a hard time. Like, I can't imagine. Like, sometimes it's just nice to have that validation. So, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, gosh. People suck, Tag. I won't laugh at you.
Thanks. It's no, it's fine.
I'm like, this is
it's
serious.
Just bizarre.
Yeah, totally.
But I think that totally goes into exactly what you were saying, where before this, in my mind, I was like, PTSD, that's what soldiers have. Right. Where I'm like, that's not what I have. And then, but it's like everyone's life experience is different, and everyone's brains react to things different. And just because my traumatic experience wasn't what everyone would maybe consider traumatic on paper doesn't mean it wasn't traumatic for me. Yeah. So
it was a big piece of your pie. Yeah,
definitely.
Okay, I only have one last thing I'll share with you guys today. We could always do a part 2, because I feel like, we have so much more to say. But in any case, last thing I'm going to share with you guys today is something fairly new that I'm working through in therapy, but it's probably like my latest aha moment. And I actually texted Tegan about this like a few weeks ago, because she brought this up in a podcast episode. I can't even remember what we were talking about.
Decision-making one.
Oh, yeah. And you were talking about all these different types of biases. And I was like, wow, some of these really like resonate with me. But in any case, I got to see this in like real time in a therapy session, where what I seem to look for and my unconscious bias is always looking for things to prove my inner narrative right. So I feel like I lead a team at work now. I feel like I'm very diplomatic. I'm very like, I have a lot of Libra in me. So I'm very much like the scales of like weighing pros and cons and like compromising to make everybody as happy as possible. Like, I feel like I have that side of me for other people, but when it comes to myself, I'm like constantly weighing pros and cons, or what I should and shouldn't do. But like I always know what I want to convince myself of, and then I just seek all the information to prove that narrative right, and for that decision to win over the the other option. So I think an example of this is, again, going back to a relationship. So the idea of being like, okay, but if I enter a relationship, I'm all of a sudden codependent, or I also need to take care of somebody because unfortunately I'm straight and therefore I'm going to date a man, and men need to be taken care of and like babied. So anyways, this is like the narrative I've been telling myself to like prove why I should stay single and not, open myself up to a relationship. But fairly recently, my therapist pointed out to me that all of my friends and family that I talk to my therapist about and really focus on like my friends and family's relationships, they're all the relationships that prove that narrative right. They're the relationships where, like, for instance, my parents, like my mom very much does take care of my dad and like does take care of the family. That proves that narrative right. I have other friends, my sisters, and like everybody has different relationships, of course. I only see part of it. I only often hear from the girl's perspective since they're my friend or my sister, my family, whatever. So I only also hear one side of it. But all of this, I like only focus on the relationships that prove that narrative right, versus like other friends that I really admire their relationships. And I'm like, you know what? That is what I want. Like, that is like my oldest sister, her and her husband are like such a duo and like partnership. They take turns doing things. They like, I don't know, I feel like it's very 50-50 in their relationship, but that's not the relationship I'm like focused on, because it's, not proving that narrative.
Disproves it. Yeah.
Exactly. So anyways, that's one example of that. I think another example, and this is where I was like, oh, maybe this is like a reoccurring theme. So the relationship thing was, I think, end of last year. And then at the beginning of January, I had this medical episode where I ended up passing out, and I was home by myself. Of course, like we established, I live alone. This happened like early hours of the morning. So in any case, I went to ER, came home, told my best friend, like, this happened. I texted my mom, told her this happened. And both of them were like, I'm coming over right now. And something else I've learned about myself in therapy / my therapist continues to point out to me is I refuse to accept help. And in this situation, I was very much like, oh, like I can see all the reasons why I should tell my mom, yes, like, please come over, please spend the day, spend the night with me because I'm scared of passing out again, whatever it is. But I was constantly like weighing these pros and cons, and I was like, no, my mom shouldn't come because there's a snowstorm warning in her area, so if she comes, she won't be able to get home. She can't come because my guest room, like, I haven't washed the bedding since everyone left after the holidays, so like my guest room isn't ready for her. Like, I had all these lists of this is why I should accept her help, but I had a bigger list being like, no, this is why you shouldn't accept her help. And therefore, like, nobody came over that day. I had the same list going with my friend being like, no, you shouldn't come over because X, Y, and Z. Like, I really appreciate your support. Like, I really, appreciate your offer, but like, I don't need it. It's okay. Where my therapist was like, you were pointing out to yourself all the reasons they shouldn't help you rather than just accepting their help, which was the right thing to do. It just wasn't what you wanted to admit was the right thing to do. So I don't know. This has come up again a few times where it's like something I'm very mindful of now, where I'm hoping I can stop myself in the moment when I'm weighing the pros and cons of a situation to be like, okay, am I seeking out only the points that prove myself right? Or am I actually looking at this as objectively as I think I am?
Yeah, that's definitely, I think, a big one. I think that's a bias that like everyone deals with, even going back to like me being like, yeah, bad things happen to me because I'm bad. Every time something bad would happen, I'm like, there you go, there's the proof. Where it's like, no matter what it is, like, our brains are designed to find the patterns. We will find the patterns and convince ourselves that that's the reality, whether it is or not.
100%.
Cool. I think I just had 2 more small points about things I've learned. And one is something that we've mentioned a couple of times, and this is something that every time a friend of mine starts therapy, they bring up. So I wanted to mention it just really quickly, is your parents are living for the first time as well. And this is like, obviously in therapy, you spend a lot of time talking about your childhood and your parents and your family and all of that stuff. And I feel like, especially as like a teen, there's a lot of frustration around just your parents in general being like, why are you making these decisions? Why are you acting this way? And yeah, I feel like the first role of the therapist is just to be like, well, because they're just figuring it out and they're living for the first time. And then for whatever reason, that's just like mind blowing. But we've definitely talked about this in previous episodes before. So not going to like dive into that, but definitely something that comes up. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is something that I'm like have been working on this year. And it's the idea that sometimes it's better to move on rather than to be right. And this has come up like around arguments or debates. And I feel like even, you know, related to politics or whatever it is, I think up until recently, I was like, well, I'm right. And I know that. So it either needs to mean like that this relationship's over or we need to fight it out. And then spoiler alert, that usually ends with the relationship being over. And so this is, I also feel like a big part of having a relationship, like a romantic relationship, is figuring out, like, sometimes it's better to move on than to be right. Because no one, unless you're like a very particular type of person, people aren't getting into arguments unless they genuinely think they're right. So it's like both sides are coming from it from the same perspective. They genuinely think they're right. Sometimes it's better to just be like, okay, move on. This is something like, luckily, I feel like my husband and I are very good at just being like, okay, whatever's going on, we need to figure it out. We need to apologize for whether it's like the things we did, the things we said, and move on. But in the same with friendships, it's just like sometimes you just have to let it go. It is difficult, and it, I think, comes with a level of like self-awareness and maturity, which can be the hard part, but that's kind of what I've been working on. And the same in work. It's like sometimes you just have to do what your boss is telling you to do. I am now like, I will make the case of why maybe that's not the best idea and my reasonings, but if they say we're still going to do it, I'm like, okay, we're still going to do it. And you just have to kind of move on from there. But it can be difficult. So that's something that, like, this has been a big focus of this year. It's just like sometimes you got to get past being right.
I hate to say it, but you just have to agree to disagree. Move on.
Yeah. Exactly. If the relationship's worth it. There are some people, I will say, where I'm just like, okay, well, you know what? I think this relationship might be over. Might be that I'm picking being right in this situation, but I will say if it's an important relationship, probably not.
Yeah. Love it. Well, there you go, guys. All the things we've learned in therapy. We've been rambling on, but this was such a like fun episode to do because it like made us reflect on our therapy journeys, which I feel like is important. But it's also nice just like talk about this again in the spirit of normalizing therapy and reminding you don't need to have this big life like experience that was super traumatic that you're healing from. Like, it's just nice to talk about the small things, or maybe it is a small thing that leads to a big aha moment for you. Like, everybody's therapy journey looks a little bit different, but it is definitely worthwhile getting started on that journey if you haven't already. So like we said, we both found our therapist through Psychology Today, so we can leave links for that in the show notes for you guys. But yeah, also feel free to reach out to us on social media. We're at our Golden 20s on pretty much all channels, most active on TikTok and Instagram, but we also are on Facebook, things like that. So yeah, feel free to send us a DM, share your therapy journey with us, or if you're needing support finding a therapist, like let us know. We can just chat with you about it. Not that we're licensed professionals in any way. We'll just send you the Psychology Today link probably. But in any case, we are cheering you guys on as you start this journey if you're starting for the first time. And I think that's pretty much everything. Already plugged our social media. We do drop a new episode every single Nope, every other Tuesday now. I'm in the habit of saying every single Tuesday, every other Tuesday. So make sure you subscribe and follow us on whatever app you're listening to this. And you can also find us on Patreon, which is the best way to support the podcast for as little as $2 a month. We also put up bonus content there, some journal prompts, things like that. So definitely check it out if you love the podcast. That is everything for this week. We will see you in 2 weeks on Tuesday.
Bye.